Are you and your dog struggling with reactivity? You're not alone. The good news is that we've created a completely new approach to managing your dog's reactivity, and it's available for you and your dog right now. Go to positively.com, click Take a Course, and choose Help Stop Reactivity to enroll in this game-changing online course for you and your dog today. That's positively.com. And now, on to the podcast. Last year, in 2025, I can't believe I am saying that now. It went so fast. I don't know about you, but it went so fast. I spoke at, I think, one of my most favorite conferences I've ever been to. It was the last conference for a while. We're all hoping it's going to come back. But it's the Animal Behavior Kent Conference, and I spoke about my reactivity zones approach. Now, this conference, I think one of the reasons why I loved it so much is that it had such a beautiful energy. I hadn't spoken live in the UK for a long time, so I was a little nervous. Plus, I was introducing something that was pretty new, but I needn't have worried, because if my next guest is anything to go by, the people who attended this conference reflected the amazing work that he's done, not just in the UK, but in his speaking events all around the world. It was wonderful to see that the people that had attended his conference or are attending his conference were from all over the world as well. And I think that's, again, testament to my next guest. His name is Daniel Shaw. He is a leading animal behaviorist and neuroscientist known for his brain and behavior work. And he focuses not just on dog trauma, but cat trauma as well, aggression, emotional health. And he uses neuroscience to tackle these complex cases, blending psychology, neuroscience, practical training for professionals, and pet owners. And what's amazing about him is that he can distill the science down so that it's easy for pet owners to understand. And I'm going to be talking to him today about trauma-informed care, about emotional regulation in animals, his courses, his academy. I don't know where you have the time, Daniel, to do all of this stuff, but I'm so pleased that you're here, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and thank you for such a lovely introduction as well. It was wonderful having you at the conference this last year.
Yeah, it is last year. I don't know, but maybe it's because I'm getting older that everything goes so fast.
It's moving so fast. Time is going so quickly.
What I was so impressed by at that conference was not just kind of the ease, with some technical difficulties you had because you were streaming it live as well. Are you crazy? But you were streaming it live, but you were just so calm. Even if you didn't appear calm inside, you were outside. But you were so calm and also just so professional and so friendly and so kind. And I think the caliber of speaker at that conference and the type of person that attended your conference really reflected that. So just so the listeners who might not know you, because we have listeners here from all over the world, can you tell me a bit about yourself? I know I've given you this introduction, but about your work and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, I'm an animal behaviourist based in the southeast of England, which is why I dragged you all the way to Kent for this conference last year. And I work primarily with cats and dogs, no other species at the moment. As you said, I've got a background in psychology and neuroscience. So I did my degree in psychology, and then I did a master's degree in neuroscience. And I love tying that into my work to think about how we can apply, so much of this amazing science that's out there to better support the animals and the dogs that I'm working with, and help caregivers better understand the animals, their animals, and understand their emotional experience. And help professionals as well kind of be able to understand some of the things that are at play in the cases that they're working with, as well as develop interventions that are really targeted to that individual animal's physiology and how physiology has been affected and shaped by their life experiences, their developmental experience, their genetics, their epigenetics, all those fun things that we can kind of dive into for anyone that's excited about sort of the science of animal behavior.
Now, what is it? Obviously, dogs are one thing, but cats. You've added cats. Now,
Yes,
I
is
mean,
that
I adore
allowed?
cats, but it is allowed. We are allowed to talk about cats on here. A good friend of mine is a cat behaviorist here where I live in Atlanta, and I'm like, girl, you do you do because no, I'm not touching that. But tell me about your work with cats and why you decided to, because obviously as a behaviorist, you're not just touching one species, you're touching a number of species. You're focusing on dogs and cats. Can you maybe let me know some of the differences that you've seen, like the glaringly obvious differences as well, but some of the differences that make it challenging to work with cats, maybe?
So I always grew up with cats, and actually, I only got my first dog, or my family adopted the first dog when I was about 16. And she was admittedly quite a difficult dog, so it was quite a big dive into the dog world. But previously, I'd only ever had cats, and actually, it was since getting a dog that I was like, well, actually, do you know what? I'm learning about training dogs. Maybe some of this stuff is going to work with cats as well, because I think we do have a very different perception of cats. We think of them as more aloof. We think of them as more independent, less able to be trained. But actually, when we start learning a little bit about how cats learn and how they see the world, and the fact that generally their attention and focus doesn't last very long. When I'm working with cat caregivers, I tend to say, do you know what? You're not really going to get past about 10 good repetitions for the most cats. Some cats, we have to shorten that to less even, if we're working on training something specific. So adapting to kind of the way they learn, what motivates them, and some of those species specific things as well. So thinking about the way they move their paws, are they quite like, I can't really put this in podcast terms very well, but they like to reach out a paw and grab things. It's kind of sometimes called that little fishing hook with cats, and the idea that they put their paw in like a river and pluck out a fish, perhaps. So they like doing that. So they're quite easy to, for example, teach a cat to high five. And that's something, if I'm wanting to get someone to train their cats to do something, then to sort of work on that relationship with the cat and perhaps provide some cognitive challenge for the cat throughout the day. That's something that I might typically start with. So we can kind of adapt things to their species specific needs. But, overall, they still do follow those kind of some learning principles as dogs and as humans do. Of course, we always want to sort of make ourselves seem very exceptional and not subject to those laws of learning that other animals are, but of course we are as well. So much of what we know about dogs and what we know about learning and neurobiology and stress and how stress affects the body all applies really, really well to cats. It's just being able to see that, I suppose, through a species-specific lens.
Let me start off then by talking about stress and what stress does on the body. We have a lot of evidence and research of what stress does to the human body. And I think there is more research now, isn't there, in dogs regarding what stress does to their bodies, but it's relatively new. Can you talk to me more about what you're seeing and how stress does affect? We know, obviously, it affects behavior. How does that translate into actually affecting them physically and then their behavior?
Yeah, I think this is such a good topic because it seems, when we think about stress, it seems almost quite simple. Be like, oh, you're a bit stressed and maybe you're not feeling so good today. But actually, can be really hard when we actually think about it to identify what that means. And if you talk to two people, they'll often have a very different perception of stress. So it can be quite a difficult one to actually disentangle, and not just for professionals, but then also thinking about caregivers, actually thinking about dealing with stress in their own animal. Really, really difficult to actually start getting to the bottom of that. But the sort of original usage of stress I learned in the last year or so actually the original usage came from physics, right? So this idea of stress on a sort of surface or a material, right? And there's this kind of the resistance response that we get from that surface is the stress that is placed on that surface. And it was this biologist called Hans Selye that I think somewhere in Europe, perhaps, if I remember correctly, actually looked at applying this concept to humans. And it really obviously really took off because now we all talk about this idea of stress. And so essentially what it means is the physical resistance, the biological response, the compensatory responses our body has to put in place to deal with the environment that we are in at a given time. And the thing that we can remember with that is we're always in an environment at a given time. I know that sounds a little bit obvious, but we are always in an environment, even if we're sleeping, if we're getting up in the morning, if we're just sort of tidying around the house as a human, if we're messing up the house as a dog, then there's always some stress placed on our body. And there's some adaptation that our body has to put in place to deal with that. Now, where we start getting into sort of the more problematic stress territory is when we're talking about very extreme levels of stress. So stress to such a high level that that's really starting to have an adverse effect on the body. And that's usually something that coincides with there being a sort of negative subjective experience. So, getting up in the morning, hopefully for most of us, isn't too negative of a subjective experience. Most dogs are quite happy to get up in the morning. But when we're talking about those extreme levels of stress, those tend to be activated by the more negative experiences. And similarly, if we think about chronic stress that's going on and on and on, and we're not having that break, that opportunity to recover from that stress, then again, that's hugely increasing the chances that's going to sort of cross over into being a negative experience. Because even if we talk about something we enjoy, so I was used the example the other day of, I don't know if anyone likes going to clubs or going out partying, that sort of thing. If you like that sort of thing, that's great. But everyone's probably got a limit with that. If you don't want to be in that environment forever, you're going to need some recovery time eventually. And that if you stay in that environment, then it's going to start to become a little bit of a negative, or a lot of a negative for some people. So stress, we have to kind of think about the context it's occurring. And of course, the thing that then makes that so confusing is we can see signs of heightened arousal in dogs, and that can be not necessarily tell us a lot about their emotional experience. We know that there's this stress hormone, that when our stress axis gets activated, that our brain sends a message down to our adrenal gland, which is this little gland that sits above our kidney or our dog's kidneys, and that releases a hormone called cortisol, which is sometimes called that stress hormone. And again, we can look at a cortisol increase, and yes, that is a sign of increased stress in dogs, but that doesn't necessarily tell us whether the dog's in a situation that cortisol's increased to help them be able to enjoy this situation, and then they're going to recover really nicely, or they're in a situation the cortisol's increased and they don't know how to escape the situation, and then we're likely to kind of get into a more extreme stress situation, and that be more of a negative for our dogs. So that's where, we've got, when we think about body language, we can think about those general signs of arousal in dogs, but we also need to be aware of our own dog's kind of emotional experience, our own dog's preferences, our individual differences in terms of what they like. What sort of social experiences do they like? What sort of exploration experiences do they like? Do they like exploring some novelty? Do they enjoy the challenge of being faced with something a little bit new that they've got to figure out? Or is that something that can be concerning for them? Do they enjoy being trained with a lot of high value food, or is that actually quite stressful for them? Because again, we know that can activate salivatory responses and it can activate a lot of excitement, but we know some dogs that actually don't cope very well around high value food, especially if they've got a history of, food deprivation, malnutrition, that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot to think about, I think, really, when we're on that topic of stress.
A lot to think about. And for people on here that don't, or we have a lot of dog lovers that join this podcast and they love listening and they might not recognize certain signs of stress in their dog. Could you list some of those stress signals?
Yeah, so I think one big thing, I mean, the best place to start for anyone, I think, the best safe place to start for any dog caregiver starting to learn about their dogs is learning to understand dog body language, right? And whether we're thinking about facial expressions, the way they're holding their body, we can look at the tail as being something that is useful in some senses, but can be misleading because we know that it's a very good measure of arousal. But arousal can be good arousal or bad arousal. So, looking at those facial expressions, we can also look at signs of physiological arousal through things like pupil dilation, respiration rate, some really, really interesting things that we can look at. Even things like blink rate can sort of tell us about our dog's arousal levels. So there's all these amazing sort of general signs that we can sort of look out for. And there's some fantastic resources on that I'm sure your audience will have been shared in previous episodes of this podcast, because I know you've had lots of fantastic people on. So I don't want to overwhelm you by listing a load of different body language signals associated with stress. But I think, one thing that we also then have to think about within that is then the context of your own individual dog, because sometimes you see dogs that show body language that's typically associated with stress, that might also be that dog in kind of a focused mode or a concentrating mode. That kind of forehead wrinkling sometimes when you get a dog that's actually really, really focused. And sometimes you have to learn about, actually, in this context, when we see that kind of wrinkling, actually that might mean that they're just focused and they're enjoying this activity. Whereas in another context, that might mean that they're feeling a bit uncomfortable. So that's when it gets really difficult. And the really cool thing about that is, I said this to someone the other day and they looked at me like I was insane. But I said, if anyone's into wine tasting, right, which I'm not, so much so that I was once given 2 glasses of wine that were exactly the same and I thought they were completely different. I was really pleased with myself. But but if anyone's into wine tasting, or, you even get water sommeliers these days, what that does is, you first try tasting some wine, tasting water. I still taste water and don't taste any difference. But you first try this, right? And, you'd be like, glass of wine, tastes exactly the same. But then the more you do that, the more you focus on appreciating those individual notes, those individual differences in flavor, smell, the different sensations you get, the more you're able to differentiate the difference between that. And that's because your brain is actually changing. Your neural structure of your somatosensory cortex is actually changing to allow you to better differentiate. So what a wine taster expert sommelier tastes when they taste a glass of wine is different to what you, or perhaps you as well as me, taste when we taste a glass of wine. So, and it's exactly the same with dog body language. When we first look at dog body language, we're like, I think years have gone back. It's hard to see that whole picture in the same way. It's hard to be able to look at a dog and really understand that kind of the way all those little micro changes work together to create a picture about how that dog is feeling. But the more we do it, the more we learn from other experts, learn from our own dogs, which are, of course, the kind of biggest experts on dog body language between themselves and others as well, the more our somatosensory cortex, or not actually the somatosensory cortex in this case, the more our visual cortex will develop to really, really allow us to pick up on that sort of fine detail of dog body language.
Have you discovered the completely redesigned Positively.com yet? When you create a free account at Positively.com, you can enroll in fun, accessible, and free online courses to help you and your dog live your best lives together. Join the community completely dedicated to supercharging your relationship with your dog at Positively.com today. That's Positively.com. I think I really like your analogy of using the wine tasting. My husband is a big whiskey connoisseur, so much so that he's gone to Scotland. You know, he goes on all of the like week long, they're not so vacations, they're learning experiences. So you go to
Hmm.
distilleries and learn about how the whiskey is made. And of course, they taste a lot of whiskey along the way, which is always a bonus. But I mean, he's really into it. In fact, he's so into it, he gives talks here to people who want to learn more about whiskey. And we have a lot of whiskey here. So if you had given me and I don't drink, I don't drink alcohol, but I do taste the different whiskeys. Now, if you had given me whiskey like a couple of years ago, I'd have gone, well, it all just tastes the same. It just tastes like a really harsh medicine. It tastes gross. But now, because even I, who doesn't drink alcohol, has had little tastes of different whiskies that come from not just different areas of Scotland, but also, different countries as well. But he's mostly Scotch whiskey. I now can tell, not as good as he is, because he can, just by a taster, tell what region it is. Is it from Islay? Is it Campbelltown? Is it he understands what those are. I can't do that. But I definitely can say, oh, this has a hint of this, this, and this, and this. I feel like this could be an Islay whiskey. And like, who knew? But now my brain, it's learned how to discern different notes in the whiskey. And so I think that is a really great analogy that I always say, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And so once people learn and understand their dog's body language, it's really difficult to unsee it. But I think what happens certainly with maybe newer trainers, less experienced trainers, everything becomes about stress. Everything is stress. Every signal is stress. And you're right. We have to be really careful about saying, yeah, but there's times, right? We need stress, don't we, in our bodies? I mean, if we just lived a life as Zen with no stress at all, would we be alive? I don't think so. I don't know. Can you answer that?
Um, well, if we think of like everything in the world being stressed, then no. I mean, we have a
No.
boost in cortisol to wake us up in the morning.
Right, exactly. But we also got to be really careful in saying, well, this dog is really stressed out because it yawned or because it licked its lips. So I think we have a great course, by the way, on Positively called How to Speak Dog if you want to learn more about dog body language. But I do think, Daniel, what you say about context is key. Context is everything. Getting to know your dog, getting to know your dog's specific signals, their actions, and the context with which they're doing those actions are going to inform you a lot more about how your dogs think and feel, and about if they truly are stressed, are they just aroused, are they really excited? I know that when I'm in research mode, that I'm like everything. My senses are heightened. I'm ready to go, and I'm curious. And you could look at my my body language and go, oh, she's all wound up. But no, I'm really in and focused in what I'm doing. So I think it is important that people recognize that. But you deal with dogs that have all kinds of behavior issues. And I'd like to talk to you about trauma informed care because you do work with a lot of traumatized pets. So if you can tell us a little more about your work, what is, for people who don't know, what is trauma informed care and what are the kind of cases that you see?
Yeah, I think in a way it's a tough question because I think, trauma informed care is one of those terms that we hear a lot. And, it's one of those terms I would say that becomes quite trendy in the dog training world as well, which is, it can be a good thing and a bad thing in the sense that, of course, it's great that people are becoming more aware. But also means that, you can sometimes, we get these promises of solutions that might not be realistic for certain dogs. And I think when I'm thinking about trauma-informed care, there's a few components I'm thinking. So I'm thinking about really having a bit of an understanding of what we're talking about when we're thinking of psychological trauma. And again, that in itself is a big topic. But we're talking, when I'm thinking of psychological trauma, we're thinking about events. Sometimes they're called sort of events with traumatic potential. There's a specific acronym that I'm trying to remember that I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but these sorts of events that have the potential to be traumatizing for some individuals. And then so we've got the nature of that event, and we've also got the nature of the individual. When that individual goes into that event, when another dog runs and jumps on them, whatever it might be, when they're in that malnutrition situation, when they're in whatever sort of you know experience we're talking about, how that individual's physiology, how their biology, their brain responds to that situation, whether it's something that gives them or results in them experiencing long-term distress as a result of that experience. And that, as a result, can lead to all sorts of neurobiological changes in the ways things actually going back to stress. So the stress axes can start to function differently and actually stop working so effectively, in the sense that it's actually harder to mount a stress response for some individuals after trauma, which is why you get a lot of what's known as anhedonia, which is where it's quite hard for some individuals to actually find those rewards, find those good feeling things in life. They're less motivated to seek them out. Sometimes you'll hear in humans following a traumatic event, following psychological trauma, that it's can become really difficult to get out of bed, really difficult to motivate themselves. And that might be something that's tied in to those changes in stress responses that we get. So I think really being trauma informed isn't necessarily saying that we have to overanalyze the situation. We have to sort of come up with a story of why this dog is behaving like this, because in many cases, I'm sure you work with as well, we don't, especially when we're talking about rescue dogs, we don't always know the history that this dog is coming to us with. But I think it's really important to be aware of some of the effects of psychological trauma, to be able to recognize some of those effects and know how we can help that dog cope a little bit better and reduce distress. And I also think being realistic for those dogs as well, being realistic about the fact that some dogs are going to struggle for the rest of their life because of that. And that's not something that dog's necessarily going to be able to fully overcome. We might be able to reduce distress for them, but we might have to still find an environment that's conducive to them to be able to cope better. And actually putting them in an environment with a busy family, kids, other dogs might never be the right thing for them. So I think being able to be realistic about that is really important. And that's where, again, I think we have to be careful in sort of the social media world, the quick fix world, where everyone's like, oh, well, do you know what? Let's turn around trauma in a couple of weeks. And actually, that's not necessarily the fairest thing on that individual dog. Because even actually, when we think of the brain, and there's all sorts of ways that psychological trauma can actually damage the tissue of the brain and actually make those neuronal connections and the other cells in the brain that all work together to make our brain fire and communicate effectively in this amazing, beautiful way that it doesn't function so well or so effectively as a result of psychological trauma. And it can take a while. And actually, we know with time, however, so I say it can take a while, but I'm actually really excited about the fact that with time, and actually giving an animal's time and doing nothing else but give that animal time, that brain can start to restore itself and start to heal. But it does take time. And we're not talking about a couple of weeks. We're talking about changes that we see over years following trauma. So I think those are a few kind of components that sort of come to mind. I think probably haven't covered everything there, but a few things that come to mind when I'm thinking about trauma-informed care.
And I love the fact that realistically, I know social media can be very seductive. And these people working with dogs that are truly suffering, and those, oh my gosh, everything is amazing. It looks wonderful by just fighting with the dog or, putting shock collars on or whatever they do. And then the dog stops the behavior and it just looks like a miracle has happened. And for people who don't understand what's going on, that is very seductive. There's a reason why that kind of training is really popular, because it looks amazing, but it's snake oil. I just, that's how I see it, this is a con. Even if you see a change in behavior and Oh gosh, there's so many questions I need to ask you because I want to talk about this human desire to change dog behavior. But these people just adding to the trauma that the dog's already gone through. And now we're looking at suppression, which is that's exactly what it is. Yet people are taken in. Um, Now we know that trauma, as you said, can damage the brain, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, as you also said, because it can repair itself almost. Could you tell me ways in which trauma can damage the brain, the way a dog thinks, the way a dog acts, and what can be done
Yeah,
to
so
reverse
it's
that?
so interesting. And actually, again, comes back to a little bit of what we were discussing earlier in terms of the types of extreme stress can affect the brain in different ways. So we know that sort of extreme but acute stress, so short extreme stressors, can affect the brain slightly differently to things like chronic stressors. We know that chronic stress can damage, and that might be something that's associated with perhaps, as we said, like a hoarding situation, malnutrition, living in an abusive household, something that's ongoing, that dog's not having that opportunity to get out of that situation. That can affect a region of the brain called the hippocampus, which is this region that's involved in encoding new memories. And it's actually the more work that's done on the hippocampus, the more we understand the different things it's involved in, because it's, most famously involved in encoding new memories, but it's also involved in actually regulating our HPA axis, which is our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is that axis that we were talking about earlier that sets off that whole stress response. So, um, it's involved in so many different things, and it's the little. So if we think of neurons as looking like these little trees, where they've got little branches coming out at the end, and that's where they take in their new information, and they've got their little axons coming out the other end that send information off to other neurons. The little branches on the neurons are actually damaged in the hippocampus as a result of chronic stress, and as a result of overexposure to cortisol. Um, and that means it can become harder for that hippocampus to function, harder to encode new memories, harder to regulate the stress axes. But again, that's something that can be healed and repaired with time after that animal is removed from that situation. And especially if we're doing things to improve that animal's emotional well-being, if we're thinking about the sort of activities that that animal likes in terms of giving them that opportunity to feel safe. I mean, that's not really an activity, but I think a pretty core thing, right? To be able to feel safe as well as be physically safe, but know that they are safe, perceive that safety, perceive that they have things like those core needs met, food, water available, and then also be able to seek out positive emotional experiences. And I think, a key thing that I always think about for animals that have experienced trauma, as well as all animals I see really, is that opportunity to have a secure relationship. And, coming back to what you were mentioning earlier regarding some training methods, especially when we're talking about aversive methods, that's, something that's introducing a huge amount of relationship insecurity for many dogs, especially dogs that have experienced psychological trauma, because, they often haven't had um, any sort of secure relationship throughout their life. So for them, it's likely to be harder to form a secure attachment with another human, with a human. So, why we would introduce something to interfere with that process and make that process even harder for that dog, I don't know. So I think, yeah, being able to give them that opportunity to have a secure relationship with a human is so valuable, and such a really really big part of it. And it takes a lot of work. Anyone that's had a dog from a more difficult background and sees, might be relating to some of these experiences in their dog, maybe dogs that do experience that sort of difficulty regulating their stress and arousal responses, struggling to find those positive things in life, less confident in forming new relationships. Anyone that's seen that in a dog will know how difficult it can be to form a secure attachment with a dog that is displaying some of that symptomology. But I would also say, for those that have been able to actually really work through some of that with their dog and form a really good relationship with their dog and work towards a more secure attachment relationship with their dog, it's such a rewarding process as well.
Such a rewarding process. I'm speaking with Daniel Shaw. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I have so many more questions to ask. I'm back with Daniel. Have you been trying to find the right time to level up your professional dog trainer skills, knowledge, and certification? We built the Victoria Stilwell Academy's professional dog trainer course for people like you, and we've purposely designed it so that you can start whenever is most convenient for you. Or are you looking for how to begin as a professional dog trainer and don't know where to start? The Dog Trainer course guides you through the learning process from A to Z, delivering a powerful yet flexible experience, resulting in VSA's prestigious Certified Dog Trainer certification. Or maybe you're already a trainer, but feel there are a few holes in your skills and knowledge. VSA's flagship course contains all of the knowledge and skill-based assessments via your own dedicated faculty advisor to mentor you through the course and help build your confidence to be an elite dog training professional. Or perhaps you already run a pet business as a dog walker, a sitter, daycare, groomer, or your veterinary staff, and you want to be able to provide the clients who already trust you with certified training and behavior services as well. No matter where you are on your journey, the Victoria Stilwell Academy's Dog Trainer course is here to help you chase your dreams as a professional dog trainer. Our friendly, accessible team is available today to talk with you and help you determine whether VSA is the right fit for you. Or you can enroll in a completely free starter course right now to test drive the VSA Student Learning Center for yourself. Just visit vsdta.com to get in touch, enroll in a free course, or apply now. That's vsdta.com. Again, go to vsdta.com to learn more now. I can't wait to see you in class. Sure, we're talking everything stress, trauma, informed care. So interesting, Daniel. I mean, I could just talk to you forever. I want to tell people that you do have a podcast, don't you? It's the Brain and Behavior podcast.
Yes, I do. And that's correct. Brain and Behavior podcast.
Okay, so I would encourage people to listen. If they wanted to go to it, what's the link?
So we've got it on Spotify, on Apple podcasts, might be on a couple of others. I haven't actually done my homework and checked that. But those are the main two that I always get sent the links for. And yeah, we speak to sort of wide array of people in terms of trying to link sort of the science and practical of working with dogs in that brain, both thinking about the brain and behavior side, and link that up to be able to provide lots of really valuable information.
Fantastic. Yes, I think, again, I don't know how you do it all, but yet you manage it. So it's really, really impressive. Okay, I think people might not know that you actually do a lot of legal work as well.
Yeah, so in the past couple of years, really, I started seeing quite a lot of sort of legal cases in the UK. So in the UK, we have the Dangerous Dogs Act from 1991, and that essentially has a couple of challenging things. So Section 1, which is pretty controversial, which is breed-specific legislation. Which prohibits certain types of breeds. And most prevalently at the moment, the XL Bully being the newest one that was added, Pitbull, American Pitbull Terrier being on there as well, and a few others that we don't really see so much. And then Section 3, which looks at it being illegal to essentially have a dog dangerously out of control in a public place. And that includes what's known as aggravated offences. So if the dog actually bites, harms, physically injures someone, or non-aggravated offences. So if the dog makes someone feel threatened. So it's quite a broad act. And again, something, especially, from the Section 3 perspective, something people need to be really cautious about, because it's very easy for a dog, these accidents to happen, something to go wrong, management to fail, and the sorts of incidents to occur. And that can often result in the UK in police being involved, police seizing the dog, and the case ending up in court, and there having to be a behavioural assessment, amongst other things, to see whether that dog is safe to go back to that caregiver's home.
So your role is what? As are you dealing a lot then with a lot of the XL bully crisis right now in the UK?
So,
Um,
yes,
yes. What does that work entail?
so essentially, so really, regardless of whether it's under a Section 1 or a Section 3 case, so whether it's a dog that's believed to be a prohibited breed, or whether it's a dog that's been reported to be dangerously out of control, often that dog's going to need a behavioural assessment to see whether that dog can go home. So as part of that, I would generally, if the dog's been seized, meet with the police force to do an assessment of the dog at a secure location. Really, really difficult when we think about all the things that we've just talked about in terms of
Yeah.
stress, in terms of this idea of trigger stacking, because, we know that if we expose a dog to a lot of little stressors throughout the day, that can mean that they struggle to cope more with new environments. Well, when we're talking about legal assessments of dogs, we're often talking about dogs that have come from kennels, been put into a crate in a van, been transported to an unknown location, and then meeting a new person, i.e. me, to then take them out to expose them to this new environment where there's a couple of police officers generally standing around, sometimes riot shields and all sorts going on. So it's a tough situation. It's a tough thing that we're asking of those dogs. Sometimes you get an assessment where the dog is stayed in the home, so the police haven't seized the dog, so it's a little bit easier to get a full picture of the dog. And even if even if the dog has been seized, I'll still do a home assessment to look at that dog's home environment to see, actually, is this going to be an environment that's suitable for this dog? Is it an environment where we can manage this dog safely and meet their needs and make sure that they can live a happy and safe life without providing any risk to other people? Because, trying to get, as we all know, right, trying to get a picture of a dog from a sort of 30 to 45-minute meeting in a random location where the dog is unfamiliar with after we've trigger stacked that dog is really, really difficult.
Really difficult, but you can do it.
Well, I think we have to be realistic, right, about what we can do, in the sense
Yeah.
that we can do it, we can try to get a picture of them. But actually, if we look at the research, there's a couple of papers that generally comes from shelter research. Actually, it's not very predictive. 30 to 45-minute assessment is not very predictive of a dog's behavior long term. So we can get a bit of an idea, but that's where looking at that dog's history, the home assessment, is all going to be really key to start building up a picture. I also tried to get a lot of details of how that dog's been in kennels. Traditionally, it's been done with a lot of provocative testing in the sort of legal
Yes.
field. So, that they would take the dog out, they would walk the dog around the place, they would maybe put a bit of pressure, sometimes they call it, on the dog, where they start touching the dog or handling the dog in a way they don't like, and they see how they cope with it. They
It's so
would
archaic.
Mm,
It's
sort of
terrible.
bowl food, sticking your hand in and out, kind of frustrating them around food, frustrating them around toys. So it's pretty tough. And a lot of people are doing that still. I don't, because I feel confident in the research literature that we can actually back up the fact that this isn't going to be very predictive of how the dog's going to behave long term, because dogs are often going to be very stressed, which could lead to a false positive, but could also lead to a false negative, because as we just talked about, some dogs shut down during stress. So, kind of the really exciting area of this is, actually, there's an amazing researcher and expert called Helen Howell, who has been just completed her PhD developing a risk assessment tool for
Ooh,
dogs.
wow.
Writing this
Okay.
down.
Writing it down.
So,
Writing it down.
yeah, so it's amazing what she's done. So it's essentially is in the human world, for when we're talking about humans that are sort of like violent offenders, there's what's known as structured professional judgment tools, which help us or help human psychologists and whoever's doing those risk assessments assess risk that these individuals pose to the public, to themselves, etc. And we don't really have anything like that in dogs. But she's essentially developed this, which is really, really cool. And it's about being able to look at things like factors in the home environment, factors in the dog's history, factors in how the dog was behaving in kennels, to actually apply that to get kind of a sort of research backed sort of judgment about that dog's risk to the public. So really, really exciting stuff. Hopefully all will be kind of published, and they'll start to offer some training on using the tool really soon. So yeah, lots to kind of look forward to there, because hopefully that's going to be a really big step in kind of revolutionizing this field to actually give better representation for the dogs, which is, in my view, really valuable for both dogs and for both the safety of dogs, welfare of dogs, and the safety and welfare of people.
100%. Yeah. I mean, look, when I was in rescue and doing a lot of work there, yeah, all of the assessments 10 years ago, sticking your hands in, like, how are they going to respond to a noise? What happens if you open an umbrella up in the room? Like, how are they going to respond to that? I mean, but even then we were like, this is a lot. This is not this is not fair on these dogs doing all this. If you stick your hand when I'm eating, if you stick your hand in my food, I am not gonna like it. But does that mean that I'm going to, um, be dangerous or be aggressive or bite you in other situations? No, just don't stick your hand in my food. Plus, if I've only been at the shelter for a couple of days, I am in that state of stress because I don't know what the hell's happening. And now you're trying to assess my behavior? It's so messed up. But when we know better, we do better. So I'm really excited to learn more about Helen Howell's work. So thank you for introducing that. Okay. Um, your academy. You have an academy. Can you tell people who might be interested in what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit like the podcast. Podcast is kind of, if you want a little bit of a taster of it, you'll kind of see some of the things that we offer in a sense of it. Like the podcast, we kind of offer some CPD, some courses for anyone that wants to learn a little bit more about dogs. And, you know, not completely, but some quite a big focus on sort of neuroscience, neurophysiology. But we also have some sort of a mix of people on, some people more from the applied side of it, some people more from the kind of the academic side of it. And again, my hope is always that by doing that, we can give our sort of listeners and delegates the ability to kind of be able to tie together all this information, amazing information, into practice. So yeah, definitely. If anyone's finished all the VSA courses to start with, which I'm sure is no easy task, because I know you have a lot of fantastic stuff. Then they're welcome to come on over to Brain and Behavior Academy. We have monthly webinars and things like that. And
Yes,
lots of
thank
fun
you.
stuff.
Well, Daniel, I mean, again, there's just too much to talk about. You are a, just a light, and I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing in the science world, but also to stay abreast of everything that you are doing to help dogs that need to have a voice. So through your legal work, but also educating dog lovers, educating professionals, educating people who are maybe thinking of becoming professionals. I would absolutely say, folks, you must, if you're listening to this podcast, the other podcast you need to listen to is the Brain and Behavior podcast, without fail. And you will get so much more information about your dog, about the dog-human relationship, about what you can do, and especially for professionals as well. I think it's a really important podcast that they listen to, and I know that we are inundated with podcasts. Everybody has a podcast now. Everybody has a course now. Everybody's coming out with it. But you're not everybody, Daniel. And so you have, I think, carved this path that is helping people has helped people in the past, is helping people now, and will continue to help people in the future. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I know that you do speak around the world. I know that you are in demand. Hopefully you had a bit of a rest over the holidays. But what is anything that you want people to know about in 2026?
Oh, 2026. So, I mean, I think probably Brain and Behavior Academy is the place I would say is the best place to go as things sort of pop up and sort of change about. So I try to keep everything kind of organized there. So when things come up as things are being organized, I'll try and put it on there. So it should be available. But yeah, I've got a couple of exciting things coming up, a couple of exciting little webinar projects at the moment that I'm working on. So yeah.
You and I are speaking at the same conference.
Yes. I'm very excited for that and heading down to Devon, which is lovely. I've already identified a couple of nice sort of seafood restaurants.
Yeah, it is the Emotional Resilience in Animals conference that is being put on by Andrew Hale, and myself, Daniel, Sarah Fisher, so many other speakers will be down there. It's a great conference. It's going to be a great couple of days. It's happening on a Monday, Tuesday, I think the 30th. I get my dates wrong, 30th and 31st of March. But yeah, come down to Devon, come hang out with us and come and listen to some amazing presentations. And Daniel, I look forward to seeing you there.
Indeed, I really look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for having me on. It's a wonderful podcast, so it's great to be able to join for an episode.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you everybody for listening. I'm so excited about my new season of podcasts. I always bring you amazing guests, and to have Daniel Shaw here has been really, really special. You all take care, love your dogs, and I'll see you on another podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together. Positively.